Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dee Dee Laugesen, Executive Secretary for the Committee on the Present Danger China. We appreciate your interest in our weekly webinars in which we expose and analyze the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare against America and the help being provided to the CCP in waging that warfare by captured U.S. elites. We encourage you to visit presentdangerchina.org for more information on new programs, access to videos of our past webinars, and tons of other very valuable content. Please subscribe to our Substack at presentdangerchina.substack.com and follow us on X at CPD China. Our moderator is Frank Gaffney. Frank is the president for the Institute of the American Future, vice chair for the Committee on the Present Danger China, and host of Securing America on Real America's Voice Network.
Welcome, everyone, to this edition of our weekly webinar series, sponsored by the Committee on the Present Danger China, and brought to you by some of the best minds in the country, quite a number of whom are going to be participating in this particular program. And I think that's in part because of the urgent, character, I guess I'd say, of the topic at hand. It is no secret, of course, that relations between the United States and China are in a turbulent state. That is in part because of the cumulative effects of what the Chinese Communist Party has done to our country for decades in the form of what they call unrestricted warfare. It is most immediately, though, a result of a president of the United States at last who is intent on doing something about it, rectifying it, reversing it, setting it on a different foundation, the relationship between the United States and China, particularly focused naturally on the predatory trade practices that the Chinese Communist Party have used as part of their unrestricted warfare against us, but also now challenged by the Chinese, who have responded very belligerently to the efforts by the president to right the ship, if you will. We are now at a point, as our first presenter will speak to, where the possibilities that these turbulent relations may spin off into a very, very unwelcome and dangerous direction. Specifically, adding to the unrestricted warfare and what was formally announced by the Chinese Communist Party in May of 2019 as a people's war, with the old-fashioned kind of war, a shooting war in the near future. We're focusing today on what do we do to stave that off, to deter that kind of war, and to reduce its implications should it occur by putting the United States on a war footing. We have, as one of our presenters, as we often do in these programs, I'm very pleased to say, the chairman of our Committee on the Present Danger China, and I know I speak for him as well as myself, and I think for all of our members. This is a remarkable coalition, and you'll see it very clearly in the course of our conversations today. These are people who are not simply expert in their various fields, who have devoted a considerable part of their professional lives to understanding and articulating what the Chinese are doing in those fields. But they're also doers. They're also people who are working to make a difference in the trajectory we're on and to assure the survival, yes, but also the victory of this nation in whatever contest comes our way. So I couldn't be more proud of the group that has come together today, or more excited to present them to you, starting with our first speaker. It is often the case in these programs that we do an intelligence assessment, often brief, but always very thoughtful, provided to us by one of the members of the Committee on the Present Danger of China who has a background in these matters. In this case, it will be Charles Sam Faddis, a man who spent 20 years of his professional life working undercover as an agent for the Central Intelligence Agency in some very, very dangerous parts of the world. We have asked Sam to address a topic that he wrote about recently on his terrific online platform and magazine.substack.com, which refers to our moment as very like that of August 1941, when the Japanese responded to pressure from the government of the United States at the time with an attack on Pearl Harbor, not a renewed and constructive interest in parleying. The topic for Sam Faddis is August 1941 2.0. If the CCP has an Operation Z, as the Japanese called their Pearl Harbor attack, in store for us, what will it entail? We have Sam by video. Let's go to it now.
When we think about where we are vis-a-vis communist China and what's going to come next and how this may play out, I think the first thing we ought to remember is this principle that you hear a lot if you're downrange and you're in the field, which is the enemy gets a vote. It's great that you have plans and intentions and you have a vision of how this will all play out. You should entertain the possibility that the enemy is not completely on board with that plan, and they may decide to take this in a direction you don't foresee. So, summer 1941, August 1941, U.S.-Japanese tensions have been building for years for a whole variety of reasons as the Japanese expand in East Asia and fight in China, etc. And we have imposed a variety of sanctions and taken various measures. But in August, we cut off oil and gasoline exports to the Japanese in response to actions they were taking in what was then French Indochina, so Vietnam, Cambodia, etc. Okay, the plan is at that point, August 1941, that we understand this will cripple the Japanese economy and effectively shut down its war machine because they don't produce oil and they don't then currently have access to alternative supplies. So the idea is they're going to have to come to the negotiating table, knuckle under, and we're going to get a handle on this thing. As we all know, I mean, if anybody who's paid even vague attention to world history understands that's not how this played out, right? This played out with the Japanese moving more aggressively and in a relatively short space of time launching an attack on Pearl Harbor. So they did not knuckle under. They did not follow the plan. They had a completely different idea. They got a vote. So we're in this confrontation with communist Chinese now. And I fully support President Trump. I think this is, we all know this is way long overdue, decades long overdue. This is not just about tariffs and the price of goods. This is about correcting a fundamental mistake that we made decades ago, where we climbed in bed with the Communist Chinese Party. Okay, so the tariffs that are in place have been ramped up. I think most people perceive that the idea is here we will force the Chinese Communist Party to come to the negotiating table, knuckle under, negotiate, accept this, act, if you will, if I can use the phrase, in a Western fashion, what we would consider to be the way we would proceed, maybe the way, well, the Italians are already proceeding at this point. come to the table, let's negotiate, let's talk. Let's think about the possibility that they, like the Japanese, will take a completely different route. And let's keep in mind that we're talking about the Chinese Communist Party. Its goal is not economic prosperity. Its goal is not a better life for its people. It's a brutal, thuggish, totalitarian entity. Doesn't care about killing millions and millions and millions of its own people. It's bent on world domination. So from that standpoint, might they not say the battle is joined? Let's jump. Whatever the timetable was, the timetable is now accelerated, and let's consider the possibilities. So, I mean, we could start anywhere. FBI Director Wray, who was generally useless, but every once in a while told the truth, said some time ago, when he was still in his position, that the Chinese have penetrated all of our infrastructure all across the United States with a specific goal to basically crash the electrical grid, crash the stock exchange, turn off the water, turn off the lights, and very clearly this is not a data steering thing. It was a data stealing thing. It was this is what we're going to do when we get to the point where there's a confrontation. We will take you back to the 1600s overnight. Okay, well, nobody's changed that. That's the reality. They can do that tomorrow. We have the minor detail of tens of thousands of military-aged Chinese male that wandered across the border, disappeared into the interior. Nobody has any idea where they are. Nobody has any handle on it. Nobody has a clue really how big that threat is. The Chinese have exercised blockading Taiwan so many times they can do it in their sleep by this point. Last December, they concluded the largest military exercises they have ever conducted, and specifically focused. I mean, could not get more clear. And then, of course, we have the minor deal of they're preparing their possibility of then flat out invading Taiwan. So the bottom line is we need to think they may take this in a totally different direction.
Totally different direction indeed. And that will be the subject of successive presentations. What other directions might the Chinese have in mind for us? How might they weaponize them against us? And most especially, what will we do now, in whatever time we might have left, to negate the opportunities for those various lines of attack to be used decisively against us? A woman who has done an extraordinary job of thinking about this problem and researching it and analyzing it and then presenting it authoritatively in her book entitled China RX, Exposing the Risks of America's Dependence on China for Medicine, and who has joined us today to explore specifically how do we reduce our critical dependency on Chinese supply chains with China RX as a case study. Of course, her name is Rosemary Gibson. We are proud to have her as a member of our Committee on the Present Danger China and to have her as our next presenter. Rosemary, welcome. The floor is yours.
Always a pleasure to be with you. Good day to all of you. 7 years ago, we first exposed how dependent the United States is on China for basic medicines. If there's an accident on the Beltway or the Long Island Expressway and you go to a hospital, virtually all of the medicines that you will receive are generic. And China has a chokehold on the starting materials that make virtually all of those medicines. So our dependence is greatly pronounced. This occurred when we opened up free trade with China, and China engaged in all illegal trade practices, dumping, driving out competition in the United States, in Europe, and even India. We can virtually make no antibiotics or antivirals in this country. So in the event of a bacterial-related pandemic, we are totally dependent on an adversary. In the case of ivermectin, which has received a lot of attention lately, China controls the fermentation for virtually all of the ivermectin that is sold worldwide. Given that dependency, what can we do? The dependency, by the way, has increased over the past 7 years. And year over year, China is presenting to the FDA, registering with the FDA to produce more and more and more of the key ingredients, active ingredients in generic drugs they intend to sell to the United States. Our military is dependent, all of us. So what can we do? There are 2 steps that can be taken immediately, and that is we have federal government entities that are large purchasers of generic medicines. We can ramp up production by investing in those companies and also having our federal agencies and departments purchasing from these companies. I'll give you an example. There's an antibiotic facility in Tennessee, and they're making amoxicillin, and they're getting the API from a trusted source in Europe. When we had a shortage of ampicillin during a very difficult time, the federal government didn't call, hospitals were not calling, and this is a company that's ready to serve our country, ready to solve a problem to protect Americans from the ravages of infectious disease. So we need to identify them and support them. There's another dimension that is opening up on this front, which is perhaps even more insidious and alludes to what Frank, you mentioned. In 2023, the Defense Department started testing generic drugs. They did so because the FDA has not been able to keep up. And we're beginning to see early results from this testing. We're seeing products coming in, commonly prescribed medications, and 13.4% of them have manufacturing defects in 2 ways. One is they are not pure. Our medicines are supposed to be pure. They're not supposed to have carcinogens, not supposed to have arsenic, lead, cadmium, and other things that just should not be there. But we are seeing samples of those that contain those very, very distressing chemicals that should not be there. The second thing we are seeing is that some products are not manufactured properly, and so they don't have proper efficacy. That is, they don't work. They're not dissolving properly in the body. So we're seeing these samples come through, and this is just the beginning of a small number of generic drugs that are being tested. So what do we need to do? I would urge that the Department of Defense ramp up this testing rapidly. If you want to take down a population, take down a whole country, it's not difficult, as we've seen with illegal fentanyl, with counterfeit drugs that China is spiking with illegal fentanyl and killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. I would encourage us to rapidly expand this independent testing of generic drugs, especially to include those that are used in the White House pharmacy. They're likely in the crash cart at the White House, in Walter Reed, and these are the same drugs that are used in every hospital across the country. So that is the first step to ramp up independent testing of generic medicines. The second thing is the Buy American. Let's support whatever domestic manufacturers are here that have excess capacity. And in the meantime, let's buy from our partners active ingredients and stockpile those so that we're not left if China takes some action against us. I want to say there's been also advances in making these key active ingredients right here in the United States using advanced manufacturing processes. We can do it. We have the capacity. We need to bring together public-private partnership to make it happen. So that's what we're working on to actually begin to solve this and give direction for what our government and private sector patriotic Americans want to do to solve this very vexing problem. China could take us down without firing a shot, and all the infrastructure would be left intact. It's fixable, and we have a plan to do so.
God bless you, Rosemary Gibson, for the plan and for your efforts to help with its execution. I'll talk more about this in the Q&A, I think, in particular, what specifically can we do as a community of people concerned about all these things to encourage the Trump administration to move smartly on the execution of the plan? We're going to turn next to a woman who has, among other things, a background in anti-submarine warfare and education. And her experiences in both of these settings, as well as the work she does at the American Freedom Alliance in educating the rest of us about the issues of the time. She was the driving force behind a wonderful program that our Committee on the Present Danger of China and her American Freedom Alliance jointly undertook to take many of the messages and quite a few of the speakers, as a matter of fact, in this program, on the road over the 5 months leading up to the election in November. Her name is Dr. Karen Sigeman, and we've asked her to speak to some of her insights from her time in pedagogy, the correcting of the Chinese penetration of and influence operations inside American schools is the topic that we hope she will speak to. Karen, welcome back. It's good to have you, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Frank, and it's a real honor to be among you today, really an august group. As you mentioned, we took this conference on the road about World War III or World War Z, about China as one of the predominant adversaries, and that's what we're talking about here today. One of the aspects, as you had mentioned, is we have been engaged in unrestricted warfare. It's been waged against us, and we are coming to terms with it. And one of the main fronts, of course, is education. Education is, in fact, a national security issue. And our educational institutions are a front of this World War III or World War Z, the war that we're talking about. The left has always known this. Dictators have always known this, that the way to subdue a society, either your own or your enemies, is through the children. And we have seen China, the Chinese Communist Party, waging this exact war on us. First, let me talk about the Confucius Institutes. They were positioned here in conjunction with universities here, and they're an arm of the Chinese Communist Party. As the head of the propaganda arm of the CCP had said, the Confucius Institute is an appealing brand for expanding our culture abroad. It has made an important contribution towards improving our soft power. The Confucius brand has a natural attractiveness. Using the excuse of teaching Chinese language, everything looks reasonable and logical. And boy, are they right. And there were over 100 of these Confucius Institutes associated with our universities. And we saw, just imagine during World War II having a German institute of some kind, or during the Cold War, a Soviet institute of some kind, projecting soft power and making them look all warm and fuzzy to our college students. It's a brilliant tactic. And here we are in a war with China, one way or another, with these Confucius Institutes being overtly propagandizing. They're whitewashing everything to do with China. They are infiltrating, they are stealing intellectual property. They are influencing what is taught. The penetration in our universities through these Confucius Institutes cannot be understated. They were also giving billions of dollars to universities. Now, an interesting thing happened under President Trump's first term, which is he threatened universities that if they were united in some way with the Confucius Institute, he would withhold defense money. So again, President Trump understands that education is a national security issue. Almost all of these Confucius Institutes shut down. So it looks, oh, this is lovely, that was effective, but make no mistake, just because they shut down does not mean that they are gone. They are masters at shape-shifting, they exist under other guises, and they are absolutely still there. Another thing just happened, though, relating to universities, and I need to get this name right. This was just passed in the House last month. It is called the Deterrent Act, presented by Congressman Baumgartner. Deterrent stands for Defending Education Transparency and Ending Rogue Regimes Engaging in Nefarious Transactions. The language of the title is magnificent. There's a recognition of rogue regimes and of nefariousness. And what this bill does, and it did just pass the House, it hasn't come up in the Senate yet, it requires universities and professors in universities to be far more transparent with the money that they get. And there are various other levers that are used as well. So this is going to be, should it pass, a major deterrent to money coming in. There's also, though, K through 12, what is called the Confucius classrooms. These are the same thing as Confucius Institutes, but influencing younger children. And to combat that, there is also another initiative by two congressmen in Ohio called the Class Act, Combating the Lies of Authoritarians in School Systems, another beautifully worded bill. It has not come up in the Senate yet, but it's in there. These are what have been referred to as, and I think, Frank, you will like this, civilization, applying she to the notion of civilization. That's exactly what they are doing. They're penetrating, they're influencing, they're demonstrating that China is nothing but wonderful, communism is fine, they are nothing to be worried about or feared. Meanwhile, we are having this conference. There's a committee on the present danger China. They've declared war against us while at the same time influencing our children. There's almost 300,000 Chinese students here as well. So what do we need to do about this? First of all, we need to pass these bills. Second of all, we need to be very vigilant about the students who are here. We're seeing this kind of vigilance happening even as we speak, not about Chinese students, but about students from the Middle East connected to Gaza and the war there. But I think the same tactic can also be used. In addition, though, what's been happening is with this penetration, there is this glossing over, the whitewashing of everything to do with China. Of course, that's exactly what one would expect. But what's missing on our side is the celebration of what America is and the truth-telling, because this is not happening anymore, the truth-telling about what communism is and the truth-telling of all those things that these Confucius institutes and classrooms would rather be concealed. That's up to us. So yes, we need to get them out. We need to stop the money. We need to stop the influence. We need to stop the penetration. We need to stop the whitewashing. But on the same, by the same token, we need to ensure that we tell those truths that they are trying to have covered. When you take our mortal enemy, as we are here talking about, who's painting a rosy picture of themselves, while also in our schools, students are learning to hate this country. You put those things together and what could possibly go wrong? So we need to deal with both sides of this picture. And it feels like under this administration, there is a commitment to doing just that. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen Sigeman. One piece of this, of course, is who we're educating here besides our own students, and the numbers of those is something that I think is also a topic to which we will return. The 330,000, I think it is, Chinese nationals in this country, just as students, is a very serious national security problem, I believe. We're going to turn next to Lieutenant Colonel Germont Layari. He is a very, very formidable forward area observer veteran, and perhaps as a result of his training and expertise in uniform in that capacity, he is able to bring to us profoundly important insights about what is taking place in the land in which he currently resides, in Taiwan, and among our various allies, spread over the vast reaches of the Western Pacific. And we are grateful to him for joining us. He is, among other things, a fellow in the Taiwanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs Institute of National Defense and Security Research. And the topic he's taking on is the kind of rapid capacity building that we could help enable for America's Pacific allies, both with a view to maximizing their contribution to deterrence and, if necessary, their warfighting impact alongside us. Colonel, it's great to have you with us. The floor is now yours.
Frank, and thanks to all the other speakers for highlighting the threat that the party presents to the rest of the world. I'm going to be very broad and then very precise in my comments going on here. We all know that China is practicing blockades and invasions of Taiwan, and has gotten to the point where, as Sam Faddis had said, it could switch from and Admiral Paparo has said, of Indo-PACOM has said that they could switch very easily to executing either of those, especially fairly quickly. Based on my analysis, I have come to the conclusion that sort of this slow build-up that we're trying to do in Taiwan, Taiwanese military, with the U.S. helping them and also sending them to the United States, is too slow. And I think deterrence has failed. And I think we need to break the glass and do something that will change the dynamics that we currently have. In a recent article I wrote in early March, I analyzed all the different possibilities, and I came to the conclusion the way to change it is to use two tools that we've used in the past. One is the authorization for the use of military force that was used by President Bush in 2001 after 9/11, and also by Congress in 1955 for President Eisenhower in regards to Formosa, which is Taiwan today. That strategically is something that would signal to China that the United States is unified in its view of what the threat is. And this would be a congressional act, and it would be up to the president to decide what to do. The other part of it would be the War Powers Act, and that would be something that the president would have to do in order to move troops, personnel into the region to protect our interests, our vital interests in the Western Pacific, including Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Philippines, and our allies such as in Australia. That's something strategic. And then the other part of it would be even considering reinitiating a mutual defense treaty with Taiwan. So these are the strategic options I think are most likely and could be done given the will of Congress, which is very strong pro-Taiwan, and the president. Now, what are some of the things that we can actually do on a operational and tactical level? So one of the things that's going on is that countries that have weapon systems that are being phased out, and oftentimes they just get destroyed. We always hear about an aircraft carrier or battleship that's retiring in the United States Navy and it's being cut up into razor blades and it's gone. So instead of doing those kinds of activities, we should think of repurposing them for other countries. I'll give you a specific example. Japan has E-2Cs. These are command and control airborne early warning aircraft. And they recently bought E-2Ds, which are the more advanced versions. And these E-2Cs that they have very few hours on them, and they're going to decommission them. So instead of decommissioning them, they could return them back to the United States, and the United States could determine where is the best use of these aircraft in the Indo-Pacific region. And one of the areas I would recommend is the Philippines, who has no airborne early warning aircraft to cover their large territory. Another country would be Taiwan, which has E-2Ks, and they're very old aircraft. And so basically, instead of these kinds of capabilities off the table, they can be transferred. And another simple area is Marines. Every year, Japan takes off and puts in a new one, and these old ones are also decommissioned. So instead of tearing them up and removing them, the Philippines have no submarines. And so again, it would be very helpful. And they want submarines, and they're being trained by the French on a French diesel submarine. These are some examples of what we need to think about instead of over and over again and thinking that deterrence is going to continue. We need to ramp up our allies and make sure that they have the ability to increase their capacity and capabilities. The reason why this is important is because on the other side, as Sam Faddis said, the end. There's a couple of academic papers that came out in 2018 that say that the idea to win in a conflict with Taiwan is to deplete the United States' ability to respond. And they call it the three wars strategy, not the three warfares, but the three wars strategy. And these academics have proposed, and they have close connections to the Communist Party of China, have proposed that they initiate wars around the world and to draw US forces away from the Indo-Pacific. And so a perfect example is Ukraine. Another example is the Middle East. And the third example has been talked about is Korea. And the idea being that if all those three are aflame, the US ability to respond to a Taiwan crisis is diminished. And so that's why we need to think the other way. We need to think of ways to make our allies stronger. For that matter, I'm in favor of our allies becoming nuclear countries, such as South Korea and Japan. Even Taiwan tried to build nuclear weapons in the 70s and 80s, and we shut that down, although it was during the dictatorship, so I understand that. But today, Japan faces three nuclear powers: North Korea, Russia, and China, and pretty busy in this area. And I think it makes it more complicated for the enemy if you have other countries who are and therefore can change the calculus of deterrence. So these are some of the ideas that I'm proposing to deal with a problem that, in my opinion, deterrence has failed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Want to also thank you for being up in the middle of the night, your time, to present these important points. And I know we'll be doing some Q&A on them in due course here. We're going to turn next to Trevor Loudon. Trevor is, again, a member of our Committee on the Present Danger China and a very formidable expert on the phenomenon of enemies within. And this happens to be a particularly important topic for today's discussion, because as we discuss on many of these webinars, we face a vast cohort of individuals in this country, American citizens, who are among what the Chinese call captured elites in virtually every sector of our society, as Trevor will explain further. What do we do about that problem? And it obviously starts with understanding we have one, but Trevor has some remarkably, I think, incisive and almost certainly highly effective suggestions about corrective actions that we can take and I believe must. We've asked him to talk about rolling up and otherwise neutralizing the CCP's old friends, as they call them, who are here applying what he calls the counter mafia playbook. Trevor, thank you so much for being with us, and the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Frank. Well, I think it should be obvious to all of us that we have a large fifth column from many countries operating in the country, which prevents us from preparing. There's been many great suggestions here today, but one of the main reasons they're not implemented, I believe there are people in our system who work on behalf of our enemies to make sure they are not implemented. And I think that should be pretty obvious to us all by now. And we can't get ready with those people there, and we certainly can't fight a war, kinetic, economic, or whatever, if those people are in there sabotaging us every step of the way. Now, some of these people are are working for the opposition because of money. Some of them it's ideology. We have many communists in the Democratic Party, many greedy people in Wall Street and academia, and others who will sell their grandmother for this to the CCP for their own gain. So how do we deal with this? How do we clean out the system? We've seen with the attempts to rid the country of illegal immigrants how slowly this is going. So if we have several thousand, maybe well over 100,000 traitors working in this country, how do we clean them out really quickly? And I think we have to adopt the tactics of dealing with organized crime. This is an old problem that's always been dealt with the same way. And I'll give an example of Murder Inc., or the Purple Gang, which was a mafia gang operating out of Detroit in the 1930s, which was killing people all over the country. They had a lot of cops on the payroll. They'd kill you if you testified against them. So they were operating with impunity. Everybody knew who they were, but nobody could stop them. So Thomas Dewey, the Republican prosecutor from New York, who later stood for president, was brought in to take these people down. And he personally interviewed 1,200 young men to form a very small, untouchable squad. He got the best, the bravest, and the brightest. A bunch of incorruptibles to go after Murder Inc. And they would go out there and they'd find some low-level supporters of Murder Inc., low-level associates. So they'd get them for bank robbery or burglary or extortion or whatever. And they'd say, here's the deal. We've got you for 5 years jail, or we can give you witness protection, immunity from prosecution, if you rat out the people above you. And they started to turn people. And then they would get the next level, and they would turn the next level. In 3 years, they had the leadership of Murder Inc. on the electric chair. They executed about 4 or 5 of them, and the organization was kaput. It was gone. This is the same way the British took out the Thuggee gangs in India in the 19th century, capturing low-level people, giving them amnesty if they would rat out their friends. The same way that mafia gangs are often attacked. Rudy Giuliani did a lot of this kind of stuff against the 5 families of New York. So how does this apply here? Well, we have huge numbers of Iranians, Chinese, Russians, Cubans, cartel, and many other foreign operations on our soil, buying our politicians, co-opting our academics, buying our media people, etc. It's a deep-seated problem. So how do you get rid of it? Well, we've got Kash Patel as the head of the FBI now. Patel could either set up a new unit inside the FBI or a separate organization and quickly gather an elite squad of people dedicated to rooting out foreign infiltration, traitors, etc. from the system. People from the IRS, people from sheriff's departments, people from special forces, detectives, not many people from the existing FBI or CIA, etc. New people, very compartmentalized, so if we get any rats, it won't affect the whole lot. And then when that is firmly established and the mission is established, the president would declare a 3-month amnesty for all traitors in America. Every foreign national, every American who is working against the interest of America has 3 months to either leave the country permanently or come forward and register their name with this new organization. You would see hundreds of thousands of Chinese leave. Russian mobsters would sell their mansions in Miami, take off. Iranians would clear out. You'd see a mass exodus of traitors from the country. The domestic people would be faced with a choice. I come in and register my name. I get immunity from prosecution if I tell the truth, but I got a rat on all the people who helped me. If I don't do that, at the end of 3 months, they're going to have a lot of evidence and they are coming after me. and I am going to get the maximum penalty before the law. I'll be in Leavenworth for the rest of my life, maybe even worse. What do I do? Most people get into treason because they get in a business deal they didn't understand. Their family is threatened. They were found in bed with somebody they shouldn't have been in bed with, or whatever. Many of them want a way out, but there is no way out now. The Chinese have their hooks in them. If they get caught, they'll go to jail. So they just keep doing it. Give them a way out. Give them the same way out that the Purple Gang got and the Indian thuggies got. Let them come forward, spill their guts, testify in court. You would see a meltdown because every foreign intelligence agent in the country, every Iranian wouldn't know if the senator they were paying off had taken the deal and was wearing a wire, and the senator wouldn't know if the Iranian had taken a deal. All these networks would just melt down. You would have hundreds, if not thousands of people coming forward to seek amnesty. You would have so much evidence to take down the recalcitrants. It would be just unbelievable. So you'd see a huge clear out of foreigners. You'd see a whole bunch of people coming forward. All these networks would melt down. And the few people that had to be prosecuted would show the American public just how deep the problem was. This would have to be without fear or favor. If it's Republicans, if it's Democrats, it doesn't matter. There are traitors in both parties. We know that. And you would get a mass clean out. The American people would finally understand how deep the problem was and would support the security measures going forward necessary to make sure this doesn't happen again. The laws are already there, FARA, all of this. None of it's being applied because the problem is so endemic and it affects both parties. This is a time for a new agency to be set up to just go ballistic on these people, drive them out of the country, prosecute them if necessary. But here's the point. We're a Christian nation. If people are willing to repent, there should be an opportunity to forgive. Thousands of people would seek forgiveness and repent and spill their guts, and we would have a trove of information that would take us years to get through. But what I'm saying is this. We need to do this quick. And that is the quickest way to clean out thousands of traitors. You can do prosecutions and clean out little rings here and there, but we're dealing with a problem that may be hundreds of thousands of people. Certainly in the tens of thousands, there's no question. We need to get rid of 90% of those people real quick, and an amnesty followed by rigorous prosecutions of recalcitrants and a new agency specifically to deal with this problem, I think is the only way that's going to get the job done in the time frame that we have. And I think there's no problem more urgent than cleaning out the traitors so we can get the stuff done we need to do, and cleaning out the traitors so if we get in a war, we're not sending our troops into compromised operations and sabotaged operations before they start, like we did in Korea, like we did in Vietnam, like we did in Iraq, like we did in Afghanistan. We suffered, and troops suffered in all of those wars because of traitors in the US government. Does anybody disagree with that? So I think that is the way going forward, I believe.
Trevor, thank you so much. This is an extremely important facet of the larger issue we're going to be dealing with in the course of the program today, and I'm so grateful you made yourself available to talk about it. Next up, we've got Colonel John Mills, United States Army retired, the man with a very distinguished background in uniform as a psychological warfare officer in the Special Forces. He has also distinguished himself in public service out of uniform in the Pentagon Office of the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Council, Department of Homeland Security, I believe the Department of Energy. He has gotten around. One of his specialties in the service to our country was in contending with cyber warfare, among other military challenges, and we've asked John to join us to talk a bit about the CCP's cyber typhoons, as they've been codenamed, and other military threats that we must contend with now, while there's still time. John Mills, thank you so much for being with us, a distinguished member of our Committee on the Present Danger China. The floor is yours, sir.
Frank, it's an honor to be with you and the other members and the audience. But yeah, let's several issues. First of all is the Typhoon series of cyber. We oftentimes call them intrusions as the technical term. The lay person would just call them a cyber attack. Regardless, this is a full-blown cyber blitz that was first announced in early 2023. It's in many ways gotten a big ho-hum. Now let's fast forward to an event that was just revealed. I think it was the Wall Street Journal was the one who received it. Might explain some of the shakeups in the U.S. cyber situation, cyber leadership. In December, in Geneva, the outgoing Biden team met with China to talk and dialogue about the cyber push and shove ongoing. And it's not insignificant. It is a full-blown cyber attack. Well, China, so they met with about 12 senior Biden officials, met with their counterparts in Geneva. I was not there, but I am having been involved in a lot of such sensitive dialogues and interpreting what I read and other input. Essentially, China responded and said, yes, we're the ones who are conducting a full-blown blitz across the entire U.S. critical infrastructure. It's because of U.S. support for Taiwan. So what? What are you going to do about it? Well, it's not in the DNA of the Biden committee to do anything about it. You know, it's the same. Their same mantra is no matter what the situation is, if we push back against cyber intrusion, we just create more cyber intrusions. Same thing they said about dealing with Al-Qaeda. If we fight back against Al-Qaeda, we'll just create more Al-Qaeda. This is just the utter fecklessness. But again, a lot of them are bought off, corrupt, and in the tank for the other team anyway. I mean, just the Iranian penetration of the Biden team was just incredible. But yeah, so we had full-blown, now we have an acknowledgement from China. Yeah, it was them. And it is ongoing, and it is pervasive across all infrastructure. So let's go through some of these infrastructures. Now, I am not saying, and Colonel Mills is not saying that the recent spate of aircraft accidents on the ground and in the air are a result of Chinese cyber intrusion. However, having an extensive experience with air traffic control systems, these are extremely brittle and were designed, even ADS-B, Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast, which is air traffic control in America and really essentially around the world, is brittle and was not designed. When we were designing it, I ran that program in the 90s as a test case up in Alaska. And why would anybody want to break into it? You bet the Chinese are breaking into that. So it causes great uncertainty. The maritime equivalent, AIS, Automatic Identification System. We've had a number of maritime situations. We've had a large Taiwanese container ship suddenly decide to do a hard left rudder in the middle of the Suez Canal a few years ago. Well, how did that happen? Well, it's been shown that malware can be injected through radio frequency. You don't just have to be hooked up hardwired to the internet. But hey, we had a ship run into a bridge in Baltimore. You know, we still don't have a complete review of and findings on that. And was there a actual look into the understanding of cyber vulnerabilities of maritime infrastructure is very nascent and weak. And, it's been traditional that the first thing, just like a terrorist attack in New Orleans, within 30 seconds, you have the FBI senior officials saying no foreign terrorist involvement. Well, how do they even know that 30 seconds into the situation? But there's a very weak knowledge. But again, we've had a change out in leadership. Now, some of the narrative is, oh, we're having a Chinese attack. This is horrible that General Hawk at NSA was relieved. Well, hold on a second here. He was relieved, and then about a week later or a few days later, Wall Street Journal runs this story that, hey, we met with the Chinese. It was the Chinese. It is the Chinese. And the Chinese are essentially saying it's about Taiwan, and what are you going to do about it? So maybe I think actually change in leadership. We've known about this since early 2023. It was originally called Volt Typhoon, but it's also Salt Typhoon. If you're getting weird text messages, very likely that's related to Salt Typhoon. We're having, I mean, there's so many aspects of critical infrastructure, but it was General Hawk, who's now gone. It was FBI Director Wray, which Sam has pointed out is right at least twice a day, like a bad clock. And it was also Jen Easterly, former director of DHS CISA, who said, this is preparation for war. Their words, not mine, in congressional testimony in early 2024. I mean, it's intuitively obvious this is malware emplacement in preparation for war. But it also has an aspect of political warfare, use of TikTok, messaging through TikTok and other social media. That's being used very effectively in Taiwan and South Korea. We focus on the military angle, but the tip of the spear of unrestricted warfare is political warfare, and that's supported by cyber warfare. So it's very important. And we're hopefully we're going to see countering this, the naming of an election observer team to watch the upcoming snap elections in early June in South Korea, which is, we're seeing a communist coup in plain sight done right in front of us. Hopefully, we're going to get an election observer team over there, which will be significant deterrence. But all of these are very important. It degrades our industrial base. This is a relentless cyber onslaught we are facing, and it is preparation for a war. So that's what you do. You pre-place zero-day malware, which essentially is silent, stealthy malware that is inactive until it's activated by various methods, and then critical infrastructure bridges don't work. Power systems suddenly stop. I mean, there's reports China has been in our power network since the early 2000s. We only have eight large floating dry docks. 5 of them are on the East Coast, 3 on the West Coast. Every one of those made in China or has been retrofitted with pumps and valves made in China. Can they send remote signals and flip those upside down? Or we got to get them through the Panama Canal. We have the Chinese spy cranes at the Hutchinson port on Balboa, the Pacific side. What happens if those things decide to suddenly fall over? Or there's a 1,000-foot wide gap that is the whole channel on the Pacific end. What happens if a signal is sent to one of those large ships leaving the Balboa Hutchinson port and it decides to do a hard left and block the channel? Hey, that could take days or weeks. That takes 50% of the U.S. Navy off the table for responding to Taiwan. So the cyber blitz is real. It has been identified, and this is one of the highest priorities. This is preparation for war.
John, I know you have to go. Could I just ask one quick question? Is there something that we could do that we are not doing at the moment to this malware or otherwise counter the Chinese preparations for war via the cyber battle space that you can talk about? That's
policy and governance. We have to make the China threat, which I understand John Ratcliffe just reestablished, at least in the CIA priorities, but in the Intel Community Directives, I think it's in ICD 204, we have to establish China and the cyber threat as one of the highest issues, way above the cut line. And so that means all resources pivot toward that once the priority stack is addressed. I'm not inside government. I don't know if there's been a formal rebalancing of the Intel community priority stack of activities, but that would pivot and we have to just reinvigorate the cyber elements. And I know there's been a lot of grousing about General Hawk being fired. I didn't know him, but I'm sorry. That was done right before the Wall Street Journal report. I think that the narrative is, oh, it's right-wing extremists that forced Hawk out. No, I think it's failure. It's failure to do something about the China cyber blitz. And President Trump is all about accountability.
Thank you so much, and Godspeed. We appreciate your contributions tremendously. Next to another part of the complex set of circumstances in which we find ourselves, which is the aftermath of 4 years of letting just about anybody who wanted to come to this country to get into it. An individual who has been warning about this for, well, much of his professional life, which has included a stint in journalism, a stint as an intelligence analyst for the Department of Public Safety in his native state of Texas, and now as a senior national security fellow at a wonderful organization, the Center for Immigration Studies. This would be Todd Bensman, the author of 2 terrific books, America's Secret Border War and the more recent Overrun, which talks about the Biden border crisis. We've been talking with Todd over the years, and notably this morning on our television show, Carrying America, about what Donald Trump has accomplished in the space of, well, days, if not hours, to secure the border, despite all we were told that it couldn't be done without a comprehensive immigration plan and policy and bills and so on. But now has to reckon with the, well, extensive damage wrought by those 4 years of open borders on the interior in violation of U.S. immigration law. We've asked Todd to talk a bit about specifically the problem relevant to this conversation, which is assessing and neutralizing the apparent People's Liberation Army presence inside the U.S. And how a particular passion of mine, crowdsourcing situational awareness might help correct that very, very serious problem. Todd, thank you so much for joining us, and we're anxious to hear what you have to say. Over to you.
For having me. Interesting panel of guests just before me. I just was on your show this morning talking about the border. The border is essentially under operational control now. It took about an hour on the first day of the Trump administration. The numbers are somewhere around 230 attempted crossings a day, border length, which is the lowest recorded in U.S. history. And it's been now 3 months of that. So January, February, and March. Hopefully that holds. I mention that because, that was part one of a 2-part strategy by the administration to reduce the impacts of mass migration, particularly on national security, U.S. national security, in terms of both espionage and also terrorism, as well as, all of the organized transnational gang activity. During those 4 years, we think that somewhere on the magnitude of 85,000 Chinese nationals, north of that even, crossed in and were allowed straight through the turnstile into the interior of the country on their own recognizance, and are now in the country. The Trump administration, what are they doing? What has happened since? Well, it's a good thing that no more are coming, or very few, and those who do come across the border now are expedited, are removed using expedited removal under Title VIII. Very quickly, they cut a deal with China to be able to deport them directly back to China, which essentially shut the whole flow down. Nobody's spending $20,000 or $30,000 in smuggling fees to get that as their return. But it leaves the problem of the 85, 90,000 Chinese that got in, largely unvetted, let's just say not mined for it from a counterintelligence perspective in any way. If I were, and I testified to this before Congress a year or so ago about this particular threat, that if I were a Chinese spy master in Beijing, I would be a complete fool to not insert some operatives into the flow to hide among the broader number of probable economic migrants. To date, we have not uncovered an agent of espionage who crossed into the United States in this way, but we haven't been looking either until just very recently. So the question is, what are we doing to, excavate information, intelligence about how many of those got in? We don't know. Undoubtedly, some of them served in the PLA. I've met many Chinese in 6 or 7 different countries south of the border. I personally met them, interviewed them, photographed them. They are, by and large, military-aged, fit, well-resourced men and women, mostly men, coming in small groups, price no object whatsoever, the best equipment. These are not dishwashers coming here to, wash your dishes, or masseuses or something working in, massage parlors or any of that. These are going to be China's elite, in my opinion, people that are well appointed and probably very well educated as well. You can just kind of tell when you're speaking to them. They're all very well coached. None will ever really talk to you or answer any real questions. They're coached not to. The vast majority of them, in my opinion, have entered our asylum system, which prevents us from being able to readily deport them. You can't just scoop up people that are already in a lawful proceeding and then just ship them back to China. And by the way, I'm not sure what's happened to our cooperative agreement for China to take back our deportees in light of all of the tariff and the trade war going on right now. But the administration did approve or pass what I regard as, maybe its most important executive order, which is called Protecting the U.S. from Foreign Terrorism and Other Public Safety Threats. And what that allows and mandates the national security enterprise to do is to backdate security vetting for people that are considered national security threats, and that very likely includes Chinese nationals. The problem is that we don't really know what they're doing about that, how they're operating with that. We know that there is an increased emphasis in the interior on rounding up Chinese who have been involved in criminal acts and who are out of status, have already been through the system and denied, and that's about it. And to the extent that we're deporting them and putting them on flights back to China, it's unclear whether they are undergoing counterintelligence interrogation to determine who they are. We have to remember that, if spies, and we know this from legal immigration under the student and scholar visas, when they have been caught, and many of them have been caught in recent years and put through prosecution, we can see how well trained they were. They got away with it for years and years with pilfering our intellectual property, our dual use technology, getting it back to the homeland. And then as soon as they were caught, if they weren't arrested, they were out of the country as fast as possible. So we have to assume that they're well trained if they came in over the border in evasion. I like Trevor's idea a lot about creating a system of kind of carrots and sticks. If you just come forward, we're going to cut you a big break and talk. If you don't, and we catch you, it's going to be the hooskow for 100 years or maybe worse. I think there's absolutely no problem in my mind with an idea like that. But it's not assured that you could get a program like that until we find one first. We have to find one, put them on prosecution, and then that should open the gateway for a program like that, make it much more easy. But in any case, there are intersections, natural intersections for the FBI and regular federal law enforcement to interrogate and do the backdated check for vetting on Chinese nationals while they're in the asylum system. I want to tell you also that most Chinese, from what I'm seeing out there, are actually being approved for asylum in the United States. I'm running from the Chi-Coms. I hate the Chinese communists. I'm being persecuted for being a Christian or whatever it is, and they're getting approved for these claims, which sets them up for additional applications for adjustment of status to a green card later, and then eventually citizenship. And so there are these intersections where we can now affirmatively interrogate and do screening that never got done at the border. But it's just going to be prolonged. 85,000. I mean, just you can see the challenge there. It's needle in a haystack. But it's still so early on right now that it's hard to tell what the administration is doing besides just moving some of them back to China. I hope that they are trying to mine these men and women for signs of espionage involvement or government involvement or PLA. They were sent here as PLA and that sort of thing, but it's very early on. And I'll just leave it at that for the time being.
Thank you so much, Todd. And we will definitely come back to you with a question on crowdsourcing before we're done. Dave Walsh is up next. Dave is one of our duty experts on all things related to energy. He has served in a variety of capacities as senior executive in the energy sector. He understands what has been done to our grid, as well as what must be done about what's been done to our grid, among other aspects of energy security. And we wanted very much to have his contributions to this program because Trumpet team has properly made energy security a top priority, and we need it to be. We're anxious to find out to what extent has this sector been particularly targeted by some of the attacks that John Mills was talking about earlier, and other means of subverting the bulk power distribution network that we rely upon for virtually every aspect of our lives in modern America. Dave Walsh, it's great to have you with us. We were hoping you would talk about how we protect the energy sector under these circumstances, mitigating both grid and supply chain vulnerabilities. Over to you, sir.
Well, Frank, I want to build on Dr. Karen's good commentary relative to the propaganda war that on carbon here that they've successfully prosecuted through their participation in the International Panel on Climate Change, UN, through their COP28-29 meetings, the Chinese basically subverting our energy supply of electricity in this country from 2017 to now. The proliferation of their equipment, solar panels and battery storage with inverters in this country has really sapped the energy system. Reserve margins used to be about 22% in the US, now they're 14.9%. That's a full 32% reduction in the headroom for the hottest and coldest days on meeting electricity demand. on those hottest and coldest days by the system. So they've done that. But all that's been done through in the last 6 years, including this year, which is really over for new power generation additions of power plants being wind and solar, they've received 210 billion worth of exported content value in doing that to us. Solar panels, inverters, and battery storage, which they control 87% of the world's supply chain for. So they've got our investor utilities on board with this. Most of our states, red and blue alike, on board with this destabilization of our energy capacity, our electrical capacity. If you look at the last 5 years, 6 years, 2000 to this year, a full 91% of what's being installed by utilities are part-time intermittent devices, largely coming from China. 70% of that is solar panels, batteries, and inverters, no longer wind. We've had a lot of political rhetoric on both sides about anti-wind's over. The new weapon of choice of the Chinese to destabilize us and add to their balance of trade surplus is batteries, storage, inverters, and solar panels, representing about 70% plus of what's now being installed here. Equally high cost, equally ineffective. Over that time period, we've really had, that whole 6-year time period, a 0.4% growth in energy from electricity because of the short capacity of that stuff. Batteries work 2 hours a day. Solar power works about 4.5 hours a day, a 21% capacity factor. Batteries about 8% capacity factor. Therefore, we have not added at all to our electrical energy manufacturing power generation capacity while they've been massively benefiting from imports. So we've got to stop the incentives on this. As we continue the solar and battery storage incentives and inverter incentives in our tax code, which are as high as 42% between the PTC and ITC, we're actually paying more money based on a percentage of incentivizing tariffs. All due respect to tariffs, Biden slapped 50% on solar panels. Oh, we've just eliminated our own for the temporary time out of that. We've got to go very, very high, because if we don't remove the incentives, we're actually paying more in incentives because we've ramped up the cost of these things, which utilities, munis, co-ops, investor-owned utilities alike are all over. That's all they're buying, as they've been brainwashed that folks want decarbonized electricity, which actually reduces the gross amount of electricity, which reduces the ability we have to manufacture, including weapons, including the ability to defend ourselves, as we have gone on this binge of buying their equipment. So we've got to reduce, to your question, eliminate the incentives on part-time, intermittent, ineffective, high-cost energy devices, batteries, battery storage, that is, utility scale, inverters, solar panels, eliminate the incentives, and go ahead and take actions to cease completely the shutdown of any baseload continuous duty power plant, be it nuclear, be it fossil, of any kind, to allow the U.S. electrification system to begin to recover in a reasonable way using localized American gas for gas-fired power generation, baseload, where it works all the time. It has a 94% capacity factor. It can begin to rebuild our now decimated electricity supply structure, given the Chinese efforts of non-kinetic efforts have been successful in this, leveraging on the propaganda war and the brainwash in universities, colleges, and through the media to now our government class that this somehow is a good thing to do. So these are the critical steps necessary to at least bring this non-kinetic activity that they've been underway successfully for about 10 years to its knees.
Dave Walsh, thank you. What a splendid and concise overview. We're very grateful to you for contributing it. Finally, hear from the chairman of our Committee on the Present Danger China, Brian Kennedy. Brian was former president of the highly regarded Claremont Institute, now is the president of the American Strategy Group. He is one of the most thoughtful public intellectuals in America today. We're proud to have him as our fearless leader. We've asked him to talk about the subject that he has thought hard about and written extensively on and championed, as long as I've known him, under the general rubric of protecting America specifically by deploying the Golden Dome, as President Trump calls it, and to conclude this program with a call to action. Mr. President, thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Great to be with you, Frank. And also, let me say happy Good Friday to all of my fellow panelists and the audience with us today. Thank you for spending some of your Good Friday with us, and I hope all of you have a very pleasant Easter this season. Throughout most of my life, I would say, and I've been doing this in concert with Frank, much of my adult life as an advocate for national missile defense. We've been mostly during this period an unserious country, with some notable exceptions. Certainly, President Trump has been a great leader on this, as was Ronald Reagan before him. But when I was a boy in 1967, there was a Glassboro summit in New Jersey where the Soviets came to the United States. And there were discussions between Kosygin and Johnson and the rest of the Johnson administration about strategic issues, some of them dealing with strategic defense. And it was the Soviet view, if you can believe it, that strategic defense was necessary and a good thing. And it was the Johnson administration, specifically Secretary of Defense McNamara, who thought it was not, that it would be too expensive. And so throughout most of our lives, we have lived with the view that we're going to rely on deterrence or mutually assured destruction when it came to the Soviet Union and today the Russians, and then today the Chinese. We live today not being able in this country to stop a single Russian, Chinese, or a ballistic missile launched from a ship. Any of those missiles, Russian, Chinese, or Iranian, launched at the United States cannot be stopped. And so this Easter weekend, you should appreciate the fact that our country has elites who, throughout much of the last half century, believe you are better off defended by mutually assured destruction than by actually building a national missile defense. Today, around Moscow, there are 8,000 nuclear-tipped interceptors protecting 75% of the Russian people because the Russians believe in missile defense. The Chinese have a crude but probably quite effective system around Beijing, Shanghai, and much of the rest of their key strategic parts of their country because they think missile defense is a good idea. We, on the other hand, do not. In the face of that, President Trump seized on what President Reagan had talked about in 1983, and on January 27th of this year, issued an executive order called the Iron Dome for America. He later dubbed it the Golden Dome because iron just wasn't impressive enough, I suppose. But if you want to read something genuinely impressive, read President Trump's executive order. It talks about building a national missile defense of the most effective type. This executive order is comprehensive in detail. It talks about stopping a wide array. Imagine any form of attack on us from missiles, whether it's a strategic ballistic missile, a cruise missile, a hypersonic missile, anything of the kind. President Trump has asked the Department of Defense to develop an architecture and an immediate plan for development and deployment in the United States. That was January 27th. They had 60 days to submit that. It's not been public on what that architecture looks like, but I'm led to believe that parts of that have been given to the White House for analysis and evaluation. Thankfully, today we have people like Elon Musk and his ability to build rockets, and Palmer Luckey and Anduril Industries that can develop interceptors of the kind that were developed and discussed, not developed, but discussed in the 1980s. There was such a thing called brilliant pebbles that would be capable of shooting down enemy missiles in flight, in the boost phase of the flight primarily. Today, I think we could also develop a system of space-based lasers that would be quite effective and absolutely necessary for defending the country. Now, most Americans will think, well, golly, we should already have had those things, shouldn't we? Or don't we have those things? Or aren't we already defended? Don't we have some missile defenses? Well, we have a crude system in Alaska and also in California. It's a very limited missile defense system. It could stop a few North Korean missiles from coming through. But in terms of a comprehensive Golden Dome defending the United States and eventually defending our allies, we do not have that. Tomorrow, Holy Saturday, Steve Witkoff will be in Rome discussing with the Iranians their nuclear program. Now, why is he doing that on Holy Saturday? Because the Iranians are a proxy of communist China. The Iranians probably already have a nuclear weapon, but we're going to be discussing with them whether or not we can incentivize them to get rid of their nuclear program altogether. Now, let me say to the audience that these are not abstractions. During the Bush administration, Secretary Rumsfeld gave a press conference once where he described a rogue nation testing the ability to launch a ship-based ballistic missile from a barge and then launch the missile, explode it in the high atmosphere to simulate an EMP weapon, and then to sink the ship so that we wouldn't know who launched that weapon. So our enemies have been thinking about how do you destroy the United States? The Iranians were the rogue nation, we now learn, that were testing in the Caspian Sea the ability to launch a ballistic missile. And they tested it and they exploded the dummy warhead in the high atmosphere. They did that to simulate an EMP weapon that if it exploded over the center of the country, or if several missiles exploded over the country, our electric grid would be destroyed. The transformers that distribute the power would be destroyed. The kind of energy Dave Walsh was talking about would be no longer. The reason we focus on this, and the reason I have focused on it for over 30 years now, has been, whereas illegal immigration is a horrible thing, and we've seen the consequences of it with the rapes and murders in this country. As horrible as those aren't existential. They won't cause the United States to lose constitutional control of this country. I believe we've entered a phase where, whether it's the Russians, the Chinese, or the Iranians as a proxy, they have the ability to destroy the United States and to cause us to lose control of the country that we love so dearly. If one of those EMP weapons went off, we're losing power and that power is not coming on. By some estimates, almost 300 million Americans would die for lack of food and water. That's existential. You lose your country under those circumstances. That is intolerable today. It should be intolerable to all Americans. This is one of the reasons President Trump has proposed and is so serious about this Golden Dome, that we Americans, we're not afraid of dying. We're afraid of not living as free men and women, controlling our destiny for ourselves. Our enemies, whether it's the Chinese or the Iranians as their proxy, they wish our destruction. We have to operate today as if that is the case. And so let me on this Easter weekend remind people that if there is a single thing that you should be concerned about, is preparing yourself to live in a world where our enemies, who do not value human life the way we do, the Chinese have killed hundreds of millions of their own people. Their leaders have talked about, hundreds of millions of their own people dying in a nuclear exchange. The Chinese don't care about human life. The Iranians are essentially a death cult. Those are our enemies. They are working diligently to destroy us. We pray that they choose not to do so, because as of today, we would destroy them. That would be a most unfortunate set of circumstances. We have a unique opportunity to get this right. President Trump's Golden Dome has an architecture built into it that will protect the United States. The one thing I would emphasize is that Golden Dome should be worked on as if our lives depended on it. We should be working 24/7 on this program, like the Manhattan Project in World War II, where we developed nuclear weapons. We should be working with that same level of intensity today to build a national missile defense, to protect us from our enemies who wish to destroy us with these nuclear weapons. When the president has these intense discussions regarding Iran or over Taiwan or over any hot spot in the world, the thing that is going through his mind, and this is true of any president, is, will this escalate to a nuclear confrontation? If it is, what will happen? Today, our only alternative is nuclear war. Better, and this is true of both President Reagan and President Trump, both of them thought, better to avoid nuclear war, build the kind of defenses to make sure that the United States is defended, so that we don't have to resort to nuclear war, and that we can defend the United States from all attacks. We have failed to do that for the past 60 years. I pray that we are working around the clock to turn this into a reality. Talk to your congressmen, talk to your senators. They should be taking this that seriously. You have a president in Donald Trump who believes in it. We now need to rally to support him to turn this into a reality. And if anybody doesn't take this seriously, I think you can look. It wouldn't take much to look at what communist China is doing today in their preparations for Taiwan, the fact that they've engaged in biological warfare against us, they engage daily in chemical warfare against us with fentanyl, and their overall plans for war. We will either build this missile defense or we'll suffer the consequences. And let me say again, thank you, Frank, for organizing this discussion. I can't think of a more important topic right now. And let me thank everybody who joined us on this Easter weekend to be part of it.
Thank you so much. We've asked people to stick around for a little bit longer. We're generally over time, but if we could do a lightning round, I think I've got a question for each of our remaining speakers, and would just like to draw them out on something that I think they either touched on or didn't that is worth mentioning. So how long would it take to stand up kind of production capacity that you're talking about, especially in the face of what is now, as I understand it, restrictions that the Chinese are putting into place on our access to medicines they produce there?
There are manufacturing plants with excess capacity to make active ingredients. They could be made in perhaps a year or less than that. Our challenge is there are many of these, and it would take a couple of years to build the factories, get them approved, and to move forward. It will take a long time. Let's start with the most essential ones. And then in 5-10 years, the number builds up and we're on our way. We just have to get started and we can make a difference.
Karen Sigeman, folks in the audience were very impressed, I think, by this issue of the large number of Chinese students in this country. Presumably, at any moment, their visas could be revoked. Is there any real impediment to doing that, and should there be?
Visas being revoked. I think the whole idea of visas being revoked played out literally as we speak. Are there impediments? Oh, yes. And I think what we've been seeing is how the CCP and the left here in the US have been working hand in glove. So we're seeing who they're siding with, and it's not America. We're seeing who they're defending, and it's not America. We're seeing who they're going against, and it's anyone who stands for Make America Great. So absolutely there are impediments. Should it be done? It most certainly should, to these large numbers of students, which is about 300,000 or so. The numbers are coming down of their own already for a number of reasons, so that's good. We know, obviously, some are here for education, but most, I would venture to say, are not. There's a lot of infiltration going on for various reasons. Can we let them go? I think we still have to keep pushing, as President Trump has been, with everything to do with higher education right now. The showdowns with Harvard and with Columbia and other universities have been very telling in terms of who's on what side. And I feel pretty confident that he's going to stand firm for America first, for making education great again, and for getting enemies of this country out.
Armand, I wanted to ask you about something you brought up, which has been very much on my mind for a long time. The idea of equipping allied nations, or simply allowing them, in effect, to exercise options that they have put into place to have nuclear weapons. We're thinking about the Japanese, the South Koreans, perhaps, though the South Koreans are in the middle of an election process that may wind up having them playing for the other side. I want to hold off on that for the moment, but maybe even Taiwan. Just elaborate on the argument that, oh, this would be proliferation and it would be terrible and we mustn't allow it to happen.
Let's be blunt. The adversaries are building up their nuclear weapons, whether it's China, which is doubling almost every year the number of nuclear weapons they have, going from 200 now to 600, and probably in the next 2 or 3 years up to over 1,000 and 1,500 by mid-2025. We didn't stop North Korea from getting nuclear weapons. We're not going to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons. We can try, but we're not going to. Pakistan has nuclear weapons. Why is it that the friends of our enemies get nuclear weapons and the friends of our allies can't? It doesn't make sense. And furthermore, we have 2 allies, at least in Europe, that have nuclear weapons. We have France and the UK. So why is it okay for them to have nuclear weapons and the rest of our friends not to? Trusted friends in Israel and India, an alliance structure of our nuclear umbrella, but hey, they're able to defend themselves. Why can't we promote that idea? Our key allies, especially ones that are threatened by nuclear weapons. Remember that Ukraine had over 3,000 nuclear weapons, some of which were their own tactical nuclear weapons. And the UK and the United States forced them to give them to Russia. And Russia was part of that deal. And so imagine if they had kept their nuclear weapons, we wouldn't be in the situation we are now. So any way I look at it, I just think it's pretty arrogant of us to think that we should be the ones to control the nuclear weapons and we're the big guy on the street. Well, we don't have a lot of assets and that multitask all around the world, all these different enemies that we have. And so I would argue that, especially with allies, we have defense treaties with Japan and South Korea and in Australia. I mean, everybody wants non-proliferation. I get it, but our enemies are moving in the other direction. So yes. Why are we just so intransigent, to make the square peg fit into the round hole anymore? It doesn't make sense. So that's my argument.
Got it. Trevor Loudon, I just wanted to shamelessly plug a book that Dee Dee Laugesen and I put together based on the first 70 or so of these webinars, called The Indictment, which is about prosecuting folks like those you've been talking about in connection with your counter-mafia tactic of China that have done such harm to our country and the Chinese people as well, for that matter, is that in the court of public opinion, at a minimum, there should be a prosecution. And I just wonder how that would feature into what you're talking about. I don't know of anybody who's done more to name names in connection with, legislators and executive branch officials and business leaders and others. But is there a place in your strategy for simply creating a sense that these are people who are in fact engaged in treason and should be held accountable for that as well?
Well, as I think Todd said, it would be good to start out right now with prosecutions. You know, the FBI, and they know a lot of the traitors in this country, and I think there should be. We know the Iranian rings in the defense establishment have never been cleaned out, so I think we should start with prosecutions straight away, and that would lead. People would start to see what was happening, and then you bring forward the amnesty idea. You know, you take a little bit of time to build up a force that can go after these people, and then you bring out the amnesty idea, because people want to see accountability. They want to see some prominent people in orange jumpsuits. So I have no problem with the prosecutions, but we can't prosecute 100,000 people.
Yeah.
And I think these are the kind of numbers that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
But if we can prosecute 1,000 and amnesty 99,000, who can then stack shelves in Boise for the rest of their lives, that's fine.
Yeah.
You know, well, as long as they cough up, as long as they are willing to tell their story in public.
I guess simply suggesting that in addition to the formal process, which inevitably does take time, as we're seeing in the various court challenges that we're seeing around the country today, there may be other things that could be done to name and shame, and that ought to be done.
Well, yes, yeah. Like,
let me turn next to Todd Bensman quickly. Todd, one of the ideas that we talked about on the show earlier today that I just wanted to share with the audience, in terms of raising awareness about the problems you very helpfully illuminated in terms of the numbers of Chinese military-age men, seemingly PLA, inside America at this point. This notion that crowdsourcing is kind of a next step for helping to find them, helping to identify them to the authorities, and hopefully get them out of the country right quick if we can. Could you comment on that as a component part of what has to be done here, enlisting the help of the American people?
The Trump administration, in its agenda, its apex agenda, I'll call it, to mass deport our way out of this problem, to clean up the country, it's going to be difficult to. We're already seeing it, that it's difficult to build target lists in sufficient numbers to reach I think what they're looking for privately is 1 million a year to deport. So they need to multiply their forces any way they can, whether that's to private contract their way into building those target decks, or using the general public. There's a long history in this country of doing just that. That's what Say Something.
See Something.
Yeah, See Something, Say Something is all about, for terrorists, and it's been effective. They're contemplating using more modern versions of this, apps where you can say, "Hey, I see a bunch of guys at Home Depot," and then you can earn cryptocurrency and things like that. You can report on your phone. I think those are going to draw some litigation, but so be it. Yeah.
I'm mindful that the See Something, Say Something vogue for a time, but also that we saw it practiced recently. This fellow, I think Mangione is his name, who's allegedly the murderer of the United Health executive, was picked up on the basis of a tip from a guy flipping burgers in Altoona, in an Altoona's McDonald's. So it works. It does work. Let me turn next to Dave Walsh. You, I don't think, touched on it, maybe just slightly at least, the equipment that's in our grid at this moment, including by some estimates 400 high voltage transformers manufactured in China, at least 2 of which have, I believe, been dismantled and established to have back doors that can be used to destroy them, I guess, or at least take them offline. How serious a problem is that? And is there anything that can be done to mitigate it in the near term that we're focused on here?
Well, there is. Unfortunately, Frank, we're doing the opposite. I mentioned the last 5 years, we've imported 70% of what we've been imported. They're an inverter population that converts DC to usable AC current with all these solar farms. Not so much the panels, but the inverters can contain sensors to do exactly the same thing regionally at these utility scale solar farms and on rooftops. They're all made in China. So you've got the same issue that's actually been unexamined on an import basis. In that case, adding to the 400 transformers that could be contaminated with sensors. Yeah, we did discover 2 of them were indeed as such, and we haven't investigated the rest of the equipment that is well exposed to this. And I just want to quick add to Brian's good commentary on the EMP. We also know that utilities across the country could spend only 10 to 15 billion with the surge protective devices and surge protective relays to mitigate the impact of an EMP. But instead of spending that smallish amount of, not smallish, we spent 200 billion the last 5 years on Chinese solar panels, inverters, and batteries in the utility space.
Right.
Small amount of money could avert the mass damage of an EMP, and it's not happening. Utilities are regularly in states not including that in their budget for the Public Service Commission approvals.
Hardy perennial of the problem of trying to address the grid issue is the resistance of these utilities. Take that point very strongly. Brian Kennedy, lastly, to you, you've made the case powerfully for a missile defense system. You've alluded to Elon Musk's skill at making big things happen quickly in space, not least. What are your thoughts about how long it would take, given where we are right now, to have a reasonably usable missile defense system, especially if we understand that it doesn't have to be leak-proof. It has to be sufficiently effective to deter someone who might be thinking the attack might not work because of that defense. Your thoughts, sir?
Yeah, I think that's right, Frank. And I would agree with Dave's point about hardening the grid. Easily done, 15 billion, 20 billion. If it were $100 billion in a, the size of our economy, you would say, do it immediately. Don't even think twice about it. The defense you're talking about, or that I'm talking about, and you're suggesting, doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be good enough to incentivize your enemies that their efforts to try to destroy you are not going to succeed. Now, that having been said, Elon Musk is very good when it comes to just rocketry, putting things into outer space. If you combine that with either some of his designs that I'm sure he could come up with, or some of the current designs that we've had from the 1980s when it comes to brilliant pebbles and a constellation of satellites around the Earth that could destroy enemy missiles in their boost phase. If you gave the task of developing that to Palmer Luckey and Anduril, or anybody in the United States who could achieve it, I'm only pointing those 2 out because they're coming up with ideas as we speak for the administration regarding that they could do something crude but effective. Let's just say, again, not perfect, not comprehensive, but they should start putting things up in the next 6 months. If Musk had his team and Palmer Luckey had his team working around the clock to develop these things, again, it's a start. You have to start with this. Something should be in outer space in the next 6 months, because the window we have to get this right is very short.
It is.
So let me close by saying, just in my own remarks, Frank, we have to think of this as being in a state of war. If you're in a state of war, you don't do things when they suit your time frame. You do them in such a way that ensures victory in war. Mm-hmm. If we're in a state of war, you're working around the clock. You're throwing a lot of resources at this. It may not be perfect, but it should be enough to discourage your enemy and to make the cost to the enemy of engaging in an attack on the United States prohibitive, because they will know we can stop their missiles and we still have our missiles with which to retaliate. That's where we are today.
Brian, thank you very much. And thanks to each of our speakers. I think this is the perfect place to end, really, as we began, with the idea that the enemy has a vote. And this enemy, the Chinese Communist Party, is arguably the most formidable we've ever faced as a nation, for the reasons that we've been talking about, among others. And if they vote for war, the shooting kind of war, in addition to those that they have previously waged against us and continue to do so, will we be in a position to make the calculation, just as Brian said, one that this might not work out so well? And again, as I think Sam said at the very beginning, they're not terribly troubled by the thought of losing large numbers of their citizens. We, of course, are. But still, if they are persuaded that as a result of, among other things, the great ideas that have been surfaced here in the course of this program, that it isn't likely to net out to their satisfaction, we may prevent what, again, some have called World War III, but I think of as World War Z, and assure that our country and our children and our children's children continue to benefit from the glories of this nation under God, that we have been privileged to live in and serve in our various ways, and that we want to render intact to those that follow us so that they may do so as well. I want to, on this Easter weekend, thank God for the privilege of being in this country and having this historic opportunity to preserve it. If we rise to the challenge and we help President Trump and his team do that as a national priority. I want to thank all of you for bearing with us through this rather long presentation. I hope that you have found it informative and inspiring. We urge you to follow all of them, the webinars, the ones we've done, some, I think 210 of them by now, and those that will be coming up. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so at presentdangerchina.org. God bless you, and keep the faith. After our program ended, I realized that we'd had one programmatic oversight that I wanted to make sure we did not miss. From its inception, the Committee on the Present Danger China has made a priority of ending the underwriting of our mortal enemy by Wall Street using the investment funds of perhaps 100 million Americans for the purpose. Among other companies in China that have benefited from this largesse are those working directly for the People's Liberation Army, some involved in the exploitation of slave labor, others other human rights abuses of the regime. Roger Robinson, one of our colleagues and leaders in this space, has pointed out the insanity of doing that. Maria Bartiromo of Fox Business has done a marvelous job of educating the world as to the necessity for a change. And I believe as a result of their efforts and ours, one of the things that developed on the 21st of February was President Trump issued what he calls the America First investment policy. Unfortunately, Wall Street has not been enamored of the idea, as it remains committed to a China First investment policy. But there was a breakthrough on the 11th of April when Larry Fink, the world's largest fund manager at BlackRock, declared on Fox Business that if the government of the United States deemed a Chinese company was engaged in nefarious activity, such companies should be delisted from our capital markets. unfortunately, one such company that is in the process of being brought to our capital markets by 4 of the major investment banks in our country, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs, is a company called Cattle. It is a company, according to the Pentagon, that is a Chinese military company doing business in the United States. It has been charged by Marco Rubio and Congressman John Molinar, chairman of the House Select Committee on the CCP, with engaging in slave labor practices, and it has a Tier 1 relationship with a company sanctioned by the United States government for engaging in the oppression of millions of Chinese by managing the state's gulag system. Congressman Molinar has written to the leaders of JP Morgan and Bank of America, respectively, JB Diamond and Brian Moynihan, telling them that they must withdraw from this effort to raise funds through Hong Kong for this company, Cattle, C-A-T-L. If they don't, he has announced that he intends to extract from them all kinds of information that would almost certainly embarrass them in terms not only of this transaction, but others when it comes to knowingly aiding and abetting our enemy, including its military. Also on Fox Business, as it happens, with Maria Bartiromo, that same day, Kevin O'Leary of Shark Tank fame opined that it was nuts to allow the Chinese Communist Party's companies to have preferential treatment in our capital markets, a function of a memorandum of understanding negotiated under the supervision of then Vice President Joe Biden back in May of 2013. We have inveighed against this sweetheart deal for years, and it seems now the momentum is coming together to end it. In addition, Kevin O'Leary called on the new chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Paul Atkins, to do just that. And we add our voice to the call by saying, not only end the preferential treatment in practice, but end the underlying document that makes it possible, this memorandum of understanding. All of these are steps that will cut off the Chinese Communist Party's financing, if followed relentlessly as they should be. And that, I believe, will create a more resilient America and a less dangerous CCP. Thank you for taking this additional message aboard. And now back to Dee Dee Lawgeson to conclude our program.
A video of this webinar will be posted to presentdangerchina.org within a day of our program's conclusion. Please share this and our other programs with your elected representatives, colleagues, and other networks. For webinar notices, updates, and news, subscribe to our Substack at presentdangerchina.substack.com and follow us on X at CPDChina. Join us again next week for another installment of our Committee on the Present Danger China webinar series on the CCP's unrestricted warfare against America and the free world, and how the CCP captured elites betray the USA. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye.